Hello, welcome in. I hope you're doing well. Today I wanted to speak about the confusing overlap between autism traits and stroke symptoms. I had a stroke in 2023, I think it was April, and I was diagnosed with ASD a little over a month ago, which is July of 2025. So there's about a 2 year difference between them. Since my stroke, I've had to deal with different symptoms since then, but I noticed that after receiving my autism diagnosis, that there's actually some overlap between the autistic traits and the stroke symptoms, and it can be pretty confusing actually. Sometimes I'm not sure which is which. It could be one or the other, or maybe it's even both. But I just wanted to speak about it because it's very confusing and I'm kind of surprised at how many things seem to be overlapping for me. First, we have communication barriers. This seems to be a pretty common thing from the videos that I've seen and the things that I've read from autistic people, but it's forgetting words. It's the words are on the tip of your tongue and you know what you want to say, but sort of getting it from conscious thought to the world to letting it out through speech. There's just a bit of a barrier sometimes. People can be quite forgetful with their words. And I've also been reading that this could be related to executive dysfunction actually. Sort of the inability or the difficulty to plan or to make decisions. But the interesting overlap here is I've had a symptom after my stroke called aphasia, and this comes in two different forms. It's difficulty with language, but one form is difficulty expressing, so difficulty expressing language, and the other is difficulty understanding. So I have the aphasia type, which is difficulty expressing words and difficulty finding the correct words. So this overlap has been really confusing. On one hand, I have the aphasia from the stroke, and on the other hand, I have the general forgetting of words from autism. So if I'm in a social situation and this happens, it's kind of impossible to tell where it's coming from. It could be my aphasia from the stroke, it could be my executive dysfunction and general communication difficulties from autism, or maybe it's both. Next is sensory sensitivities. This one is also interesting because your sensory sensitivities can change after a stroke. I've always been very sensitive to heat. I'm always too warm. I always want things to be colder than they are. And a symptom after my stroke is that actually got turned up. So it went from hypersensitive to hypersensitive to even more sensitive. Now I'm just very warm all of the time. If I can feel the slightest change even easier now. It's like my sensitivity went from 10 to past 10. This is also a confusing overlap because I already had this sensitivity before my stroke happened. I've always had it. So I don't know if I'm battling the autistic sensory problems or the stroke sensory problems. Or again, perhaps it's even both. Regulating emotion. I've always had difficulties regulating my emotions, and I'm pretty sure I'm alexithymic to some extent, which is you have difficulty understanding your own emotions. I've always had this, which points to autism because of course I've always been autistic. So I can shut down a lot. I'll just go non-verbal and just be completely silent, and I cannot handle any more input. My emotions are too much. This is also a symptom that you can deal with after stroke. Difficulties regulating emotions and even things like neuroticism has been reported in people post-stroke. I've had some difficult years and I've had quite a few breakdowns and meltdowns. And yet again, it feels impossible for me to tell. I don't know if I'm dealing with a stroke symptom or just a heightened autistic trait. Executive dysfunction. I've always had issues with this. Like I mentioned before in a previous video, I'm really good at making plans. I've made incredible plans. I have pages and pages detailing every step of things that I want to do, and I just cannot take that first step. It's like there's just a mental block. There's a brick wall in front of this first step. and it's very annoying, and it's something I've always dealt with. But it became even more difficult after I had my stroke. I now have this double dysfunction, which is great fun, and I'm never sure which side it's coming from. Mental illness risks. With autism, just the stress of having to deal with a world that was not made for you, a world that very rarely accommodates for you. Just the exhaustion of being autistic can have mental health risks in itself. Things like depression and anxiety are much higher in people with autism. And this risk also exists for people post-stroke. You have to learn things again. Your brain has been damaged and you have these new symptoms that you have to deal with. It's an entirely new way of life. And also there's some grief that comes with that. You've lost things and now you've sadly gained symptoms. You've lost probably a lot of positives and gained a lot of negatives. So there's just intrinsic grief in that, which also increases your risk for mental illness. So that's another overlap that I noticed. Depression and anxiety can arrive very quickly and very easily with the difficulties of autistic traits and stroke symptoms. They're both very similar in that way. Spatial memory. So I've read a lot about this, and it definitely seems to be an autistic trait, but it's a rarer autistic trait. It's a lot less common, but I have always had really bad spatial memory. So I have difficulty navigating and remembering places. Just my visual memory for locations and geography generally is so bad, really, really bad, and it always has been. Like, I can get lost in a square room, I'm pretty sure. But strangely, and it's kind of confusing to me, I was always pretty good with maps. If I had a map, I could make my way around and I could understand sort of locations and where I am in relation to other things. So I was always kind of good with maps, which is a bit confusing, but that's how it is. But after my stroke, I even lost that ability. Maps are just very confusing to me now. I have all the same spatial issues that I had before. I just cannot navigate anything. Now it's sort of the final piece that I had, the final thing that I could use was maps. And after my stroke, that was affected. So it's something that I've always had because of my autism, but sadly it has been amplified after my stroke. I now have even more difficulties with spatial memory and navigation. Can you relate to any of this overlap? Please comment. I would be very interested to hear. This doesn't seem like a very common experience for people. As an autistic person, I want all the information I can get. It would be nice to talk about this because I feel kind of alone with this experience, and I'm not sure if other people have this overlap confusion between autism and stroke symptoms. As always, thank you so much for listening. Please like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. If you didn't like the video, I would really like a comment, and you can tell me how I can improve. I'm always looking to improve my content, so please do that. Hope you have a lovely day, and thank you for listening. Bye bye.